Channel, everybody. Today is Monday, September 14th. We are now just 49 days away, if you can believe it, from the elections on November 3rd. This is going to be officially our 50-day presidential election forecast because if you really think about it, it's technically 50 days. But it just depends whether or not you count November 3rd. Not that significant either way. So there has been some significant developments that we're going to break down a little bit. I might address some of the comments that we've gotten on the channel in the last couple of weeks. But as we always do, all 50 states, we're going to go through some of the polling, and we're going to just discuss the various natures of each race and go from there. So in the state of Hawaii, we've talked before how there's not much going on here. There was a brief moment in time when the Republican Party thought they could start to get some consistent moderate politicians elected here because they had that one governorship a couple of cycles ago, but that does not seem to have been materializing. So as you could probably guess, it's going to be a safe 4 votes for the Democrats. Now in Alaska, this one is always one to keep somewhat of an eye on because this is an elastic state, no pun intended. This is a state that could break one way or another. It's always a little difficult to gauge exactly where it stands. And the reality of the situation is, while this usually is a safe GOP state, the Democratic Party has had some success here in recent memory as well. Mark Begich was able to get himself elected in that gubernatorial race not that long ago, but that was the only governorship that the Republicans were able to flip from blue to red. Meanwhile, they lost 7 over to the Democrats for a net loss of 6. So on the presidential level, this is going to be safe, although on that Senate level, the race between Al Gross and Dan Sullivan, that is worth keeping a close eye on. So don't discount Al Gross's chances in that Senate race. Now in the state of Washington, this was never really up for grabs anyway. But everything that we're seeing going on in the Seattle area over the last 3-4 months pretty much solidifies this. And this is going to remain with Joe Biden without much difficulty. And the same thing is going to happen in Oregon. Now, in California, obviously, this was not really in question to begin with. If there was any doubt, as to where this state was going to end up, that has been completely squashed as Kamala Harris completely puts it over the top. Even more so than it already was. So that's also going to be a safe Democratic retention. Now, in the state of Nevada, I am for the first time on this channel going to change the characterization. The Democratic Party is in some trouble in this state for several reasons. First of all, we have broken down before, and it's no secret that the Republican Party is always overstated in the polling in this state. They are always given a better chance than people think in this state. Whereas, oftentimes, even though they may be close or even sometimes ahead in the polls, remember Donald Trump actually led in this state by 1 point on election day, but no one actually really expected him to win the state. So it's just widely accepted that the Republicans almost always have a little bit of a, misleading lead in the polls sometimes. And that's the case again. But the most recent poll had the Democrats and Joe Biden only up by 4 points. And here's the biggest concern for the Democrats. In the state of Nevada, part of the reason it continues to be a good, safe, Democratic state for them is that is a state where they famously have a very, very good, very consistent, strong turnout apparatus. That's obviously not going to happen this time. Okay, the pandemic is limiting that, and that is inhibiting the Democratic Party's efforts to boost turnout in this state. So you can imagine, this is kind of, even though some evaluators still kind of consider Nevada to be a swing state, even though the Democrats put to rest really any doubts about that in 2018 when they flipped the governorship and the lone GOP senator here flipped from red to blue. The reality is it is still close enough for some characterizations to label it as a swing state. Now the GOP has a chance here. And so this is kind of a base 6 votes for the Democrats. And if they lose, that's comparable to the GOP losing 6 votes in Mississippi. And that's going to be tough to make up because even though Joe Biden is favored and justifiably favored to win the election and has a number of avenues to win, and I think more avenues to victory than Donald Trump, losing Nevada cannot happen for Joe Biden. It just cannot happen. That is going to make all of those paths to victory, of which there are several, substantially more difficult. So I'm going to label this for the first time on this channel, lean Democrat. Okay, and that should get the Democratic Party's attention because again, if they lose Nevada, they are in dire trouble for the rest of the election. Now, in Idaho, we've discussed how there is some, some of the first signs of life for the Democratic Party, but not in this election. Utah, interesting state to watch, not because we don't know who the winner is going to be, but it's interesting to see what the margin is going to end up being between Donald Trump and Joe Biden for several reasons. First of all, not that long ago now, some time ago, like 2 months or so, there was a poll that had Donald Trump only up by 4 points in the state of Utah. Now that's just kind of a one-off. Maybe a surprising number of Democrats were captured in that poll. Secondly, though, remember the Democrats did get a House seat flipped here. That was one of their 40 pickups when they flipped the House seat. Mia Love lost to Ben McAdams right here in the Salt Lake City area. She is expected to win and retain that House seat. Okay, so that's a big retention for the Democrats, which will just continue to make whatever cycle comes up that the Republicans think they have a real chance to flip the House. That's not this time, but if they have to flip one more, like they'll eventually have to in Utah, it just makes it that much tougher a lift. Second of all, Mitt Romney I'm still not really clear, I don't think anybody really is, on whether or not he has actually come out and entirely endorsed Joe Biden. Excuse me, though he has said unequivocally that he will not be supporting Donald Trump. But Mitt Romney, as we know, is beloved in the state of Utah. Okay, voters from both parties love and revere him. So that carries some weight. And furthermore, Evan McMullin, who we can't forget, got 1 out of every 5 votes from the state in the 2016 election, endorsed Joe Biden. Okay, so from a margin perspective, I think Donald Trump is only going to win this with a plurality. I'm not saying Joe Biden's even going to clear 40%, but Donald Trump is not going to win this state with a majority of the vote. I think turnout is going to be rather low. Enthusiasm for Donald Trump is low in this state. The 6 votes will be his, but I'm going to label it likely just because we don't know necessarily what the final margin is going to be. All right, now in the state of Arizona, this is a realignment state, and both parties are obviously watching this very carefully, although it's clearly been favoring one party over the last 4 years, and that's the Democrats. There are now more House members in the United States House from the state of Arizona that are Democrats compared to Republicans. The Democrats also made a number of state legislature gains in this state 2 years ago. Furthermore, while the governorship remains with the GOP, that being Doug Ducey, an avid Trump supporter, the Democrats got one of those 2 Senate seats flipped when Martha McSally was defeated by Kyrsten Sinema, who's an openly bisexual woman. So, it goes to show you that you don't have to be that moderate, at least demographically. Her policies may be a little bit moderate, but demographically, you don't necessarily have to be this, centrist white male to get elected in Arizona as a Democrat. So furthermore, the Democrats, of course, fielded that exact candidate I just outlined for the other Senate seat, and that's Mark Kelly, who's again challenging Martha McSally. Doug Ducey and the Republicans kind of blew it. Okay, if you ask me, they kind of threw away this Senate seat because Martha McSally was already deeply disliked, and they didn't need any more proof than when she lost to Kyrsten Sinema 2 years ago, and she is getting whooped by Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, the veteran, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, who is trouncing her in the polls. So the Senate races look very good for the Democratic Party. They were expected to retain those House seats as well. On the presidential one, it had narrowed up some, and it's definitely not, even on the best of days for Joe Biden in the state, it was never as lopsided as it was for Mark Kelly. But a poll that just got released today had Biden up by 10 points on Joe Biden in the state of Arizona. So I'm going to label this likely Democrat, and that's obviously quite a pickup at an 11 votes for the Democrats. And you just have to imagine if they can flip Arizona, then they can hang on to some of those outstanding voters out here in Nevada. Now in Montana, there are so many different races to break down here. You got the governorship race, the House race, the Senate race, and the presidential race. The presidential one is the least competitive, but it's worth mentioning in this state how the Democrats are gaining momentum in both the Senate race here, as well as the House race, where Kathleen Williams is challenging Matt Rosendale, who's run for office like half a dozen times now. They're also gaining ground in the governorship race, which had for months been led by Greg Gianforte, who currently is the House member from this whole state. He's being challenged by Mike Cooney, the current lieutenant governor of Montana. But on the presidential level, that's going safe. Wyoming will also be safe. Colorado. We also know the 270 mobile game, as well as 538, does list Colorado as a swing state. And a number of Democratic prognosticators have continued to say, well, you can't take Colorado for granted, all that. But let's be honest, Donald Trump is not going to win these 9 votes, and he's not going to come necessarily that close. I think it's just a thing where the margins are always a little closer than you think, just because it is basically accepted entirely to be a blue state at this point. So, with it being all but solidified as a blue state, given that the Democrats were able to replace John Hickenlooper, the Democratic governor, when he ran for president, with Jared Polis, an openly gay Democratic governor. That pretty much gives you the sense of where the state leans politically. Cory Gardner, sort of the last vestige of GOP politics in this state, is up, and he is probably going to lose against John Hickenlooper. The latest poll, which got released just today, by the way, had Hickenlooper, who is now challenging him for Senate after dropping out of the presidential race, leading Cory Gardner by 10 points. Joe Biden's going to be just fine here. New Mexico, we're not even really going to talk about it. There is that open Senate race here. Ben Ray Lujan, I forget the Republican candidate's first name, Ron Shetty, I believe is his name. But that's going to go the Democratic Party's way. Now, in the state of North Dakota, this was a state, by the way, that was quietly kind of competitive, as most states were back in 2008. This was not a state that was called right at poll closing hour. Remember, Kent Conrad, a Democrat, represented this state for the Democrats for many years in the Senate, and then eventually Heidi Heitkamp came along as well. So the Democrats have had themselves a lot of success, in this party in some of those statewide races, but obviously on the presidential level, they cannot expect to take down Donald Trump in this state safe. Same as South Dakota, same as Nebraska. Now in Kansas, we do need to keep an eye on it just because of that governorship race in 2018 that went the Democratic Party's way when Laura Kelly was able to defeat Chris Kobach, who then ran again in the primary. And then now, even on the presidential level, it doesn't appear as though the GOP is going to have too much of an issue in this state. But going forward, it is something to watch, and we obviously need to keep an eye on that Senate race. Oklahoma, while the Democrats look like they're going to retain that one House seat that they were able to win right in the Oklahoma City area, it is worth noting that this is one of 2 states, the other being West Virginia, that in 2016 Donald Trump carried every single county in, okay? Now, in Texas, the Lone Star State, obviously this is the second biggest electoral prize in the country. 38 electoral votes are on the line. As of now, there's really no reason to suspect that the Senate race is in too much question, as MJ Hager, who ran for that House seat unsuccessfully a couple of years ago, is trying to take down John Cornyn, who a longtime GOP senator who looks like he's going to be just fine. But on the presidential level, this is one to keep an eye on, okay? Because Joe Biden has been able to consistently outperform MJ Hager, consistently outperform Hillary Clinton, and we just don't know, okay? We don't really know where this state is going to end up, okay? This is a tight one, and pretty much since February, okay, and March, it has been holding basically right at, a statistical tie. And that tells you a lot. And some of the same polls that have John Cornyn faced off with MJ Hager basically show the same thing. And that is that Joe Biden, is peeling off some of those John Cornyn supporters who, may have supported Trump back in 2016 and still support John Cornyn, but are not going to support Donald Trump a second time around. Okay, so, by and large, what we're seeing is a pretty consistent and thorough trend where Joe Biden clearly appears to be winning some of these detached sort of split voters that may vote for Joe Biden and may also vote for John Cornyn. So I'm going to label it tilt Republican just because these states, basically have an identity. Okay, we talked about that. They have identities. And, when they're so close, they typically just lean one way or another, or in this case, tilt one way or another. Minnesota is going to be a safe Democratic retention. Donald Trump came very close here. 1.5 points was all he lost by. Hillary won this with a plurality back in 2016. But, any hopes that Donald Trump had of flipping the state have since been completely dashed, as, because what we know is that there were 3 statewide races here in the 2018 midterms, and the Democrats won all 3 of them. Okay, Tina Smith, the special election that year, she was able to win, replacing the resigned Senator Al Franken, and the other Senate seat, Amy Klobuchar, she easily won re-election. Tim Walz, the governor, won easily as well. Tina Smith is very much expected to win her race as well. And I think that everything, I already thought it was a pretty safe retention for the Democrats, but everything that we saw going on in Minneapolis pretty much puts this even more to bed than it was beforehand. Now in Iowa, again, so much to unpack here in this state. It's hard to really gauge exactly where it stands from time to time. The reality of the situation is what we don't exactly know is, given there are 4 House districts, as we know, in this state. Okay, the Democrats have 3 of them. The 4th one is up here in the northwest portion of the state, and that was for years represented by Steve King, who, of course, was primaried out. The Republicans are probably going to retain that seat as well. The Democrats came closer to winning the governorship here than they had in recent years. In 2018, they lost by about 6 points, 53 to 47, much closer than the presidential race was 2 years before that. Of course, both senators remain with the GOP. So it's sort of a split decision, but mostly favoring the Republicans as they have both senators, the governorship. They won the last presidential election here, but the Democrats do have 3 of those 4 House seats, and there's no real data to suggest that they're going to lose any of them. This time around, Teresa Greenfield, who was for a long time leading that Senate race against Joni Ernst, which gave Democrats there were a lot of bullish Democrats that thought that race could flip to their side, but that doesn't appear to be happening. The latest poll had her down by 5 points. I think that'll be close, but I think that Joni Ernst is ultimately going to pull this one out. And on the presidential level, I'm going to label it lean for the GOP. Now in the state of Missouri, remember Barack Obama only lost the state by 4,000 votes back in 2008, but since then, over the last 12 years, it has shifted further and further and further rightward. Nothing to really talk about this time around as well. 8 years ago, 4 years ago, it was pretty much a solid retention for the GOP. And then Josh Hawley, who's a very, very strong, avid Trump supporter, was able to unseat Democrat Claire McCaskill as well for that Senate seat. So I expect this to be, even though the margin might ultimately end up being likely, I'm going to label it safe for the GOP. Now in Arkansas, we're not even going to talk about it. Louisiana, while it does have a Democratic governor, will also remain comfortably with the GOP. Mississippi, turnout is going to be high here. Okay, it just is. Turnout's going to be high in this state because, as we know, this is a high minority population state, the highest minority population state in the United States. Mississippi is a state where the Democrats can regularly get up over 40%. Mike Espy is giving it another shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. After that special election run in which he came, relatively close, lost by about 6 points, but, he did ultimately lose it. So he's giving it another shot, and that combined with the turnout, I think is going to make this closer than the Republicans would like, but ultimately it's going to stay with them. I have this going likely red as of now. Now in Alabama, this to me is going to be safe. I think the whole thing with Doug Jones defeating Roy Moore was a complete aberration. I think that the nature of that race, made it so difficult for the GOP to retain that seat, and much easier for the Democrats to get a shocking, even with all those factors that definitely favored the Democrats, it was still a nail biter. And so this time around, Tommy Tuberville is easily going to defeat Doug Jones in the presidential race. It's not even going to be competitive. Now in Georgia, the Democratic Party thinks they have a real shot here. Okay, Jon Ossoff is giving it another shot after that unsuccessful House bid against Karen Handel. It was the most expensive House race in United States history, but he ultimately lost. He's now giving it a shot against David Perdue, the Senate candidate. The latest poll had Jon Ossoff up by 1 point against David Perdue. I still don't ultimately expect him to win, but again, Joe Biden has been even outperforming Jon Ossoff, who's done a pretty good job himself. So all told, at the end of the day, I think that Donald Trump and the GOP are just going to be able to edge this one out. I have them winning by about 1 to 2 percentage points, so that's going to be tilt red. Now in the state of Florida, tough to tell here, man. I mean, it really is. I mean, this is one that, we can't exactly tell exactly where this is going to end up because there, again, so many mixed results here that have, some that sort of have some of the results going one way and some going others. The Democrats in the midterms, didn't do very well. Okay, they lost the Senate race here. Bill Nelson, longtime senator, lost to Rick Scott. They also lost the governorship here in a close one when Andrew Gillum was defeated by Ron DeSantis, keeping that uh, governorship in the Republicans' column as it has been over the last four. The last four governors have all been Republican, even though one has since switched over to the Democratic Party. Furthermore, what we just don't know is that, but part of what's going wrong for the Democrats is there's this enormous vote by mail dispute going on here. And as we know, if less votes are counted by mail, that is going to help the GOP. So all told, I think the vote by mail factor is going to be key. I have this, but again, the reality is all we have to go by is the polling right now, and we can't necessarily forecast based on a total unknown, which is what the whole vote by mail thing is at the moment. So as of now, I still have this going tilt for Joe Biden, but this could change any day now, and I would expect that at the very least, Joe Biden might surrender his lead and make this a little bit closer than he would like against Donald Trump. South Carolina is going to be a safer tension for the GOP. On the Senate level, we need to keep at least somewhat of an eye on it because that advertising blitz Jamie Harrison was going on against Lindsey Graham did appear to be working somewhat. But what we just don't really know yet is whether or not that's going to be able to continue for too much longer. So I expect the GOP to be just fine in this state. What we don't quite know yet is whether or not that the relatively close governorship election, which had the Democrats within 8 points of winning that seat, is a sign of things to come or any kind of electoral harbinger. Now, in Tennessee, it's a safe state long since the days of Phil Bredesen and Al Gore. It's a pretty much safe Republican stronghold at the moment. Now, in the state of North Carolina, we changed the characterization here on our last election prediction video, and that was because the data that we're seeing backing up other Democrats in the state, similarly to Montana, there's a lot going on in this state. There's a governorship election, a Senate election, and multiple competitive House elections. At the moment, Cal Cunningham, the Democratic Senate challenger, is ahead of Thom Tillis, the GOP senator, and so that should give the GOP cause to pause in this state, because we just don't know necessarily what that means for the presidential race, especially because Roy Cooper, the very popular Democratic governor, is defeating Dan Forest and very thoroughly. So that would suggest that Joe Biden is going to be fine, but the polls that he's leading in only have him up by 1 point, 2 points, and there have been some that have Donald Trump leading altogether. So I have this as tilt Republican, because that suggests to me that you have some voters that just particularly like Roy Cooper, maybe are a little disenchanted with Thom Tillis, and will still vote for Donald Trump. Kentucky, we've talked before about how Amy McGrath was a rising star for a while. She's not going to win that race. West Virginia, as I said earlier, was the only other state, along with Oklahoma, that had all of its counties vote the same way, and they voted for Trump. Virginia is now a safe Democratic state. It wasn't that long ago when this was a conservative bastion, and then only a few years it took to make it real competitive. Now it's not even really that competitive. Okay, it's going to be a safe Democratic retention. Now in Illinois, also the kind of the same thing. The Republicans always can try to convince just enough people that they can sort of get this done in this state, but I don't think that's realistic. Indiana, remember, it was only 2 years ago which the Democrats had a senator here, that being Joe Donnelly, but he was defeated by Mike Braun. That was a big part of a big night for the GOP in the Senate. They flipped 4 seats: Florida, Indiana, North Dakota, and Missouri, while the Democrats flipped Arizona and Nevada. In the state of Ohio, now obviously this is basically what the whole Electoral College came down to in 2004. Donald Trump carried the state pretty overwhelmingly 4 years ago, so that alone, I just don't think Joe Biden's going to be able to flip that many votes. Sherrod Brown was able to win 2 years ago, re-election, and the governorship race was much closer. The Democrats are also eyeing this other Senate race, currently held by Rob Portman, in 2 years. I don't expect him to win that race. I do expect Joe Biden to come a lot closer than Hillary Clinton did, probably as close as 48%, but I'm still going to label it tilt red. Maryland is obviously going to be a safe Democratic state, as will D.C. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, obviously this was one of the most pivotal wins for Donald Trump 4 years ago. But since then, it's been pretty kind to the Democrats. Early on in Donald Trump's term, there was a state Senate special election kind of here in the center of the state that went the Democratic Party's way. That district is now represented by a Democrat for the first time in decades. The midterms are also very friendly to the Democrats. Tammy Baldwin, as expected, was able to win, but she also won by double digits. Okay, 55 to 44 was the official count. And other than that, A Supreme Court race was held here, and the Democratic Party was also able to get that one onto their side as well. The GOP still has the majority here, but it's no longer 5-2. It's now 4-3. But all those things in mind, combined with steady polling advantages for Joe Biden, to me has this as a lean for Joe Biden and the Democrats. Michigan has also been very friendly. There were two statewide races here in 2018 that both went the Democratic Party's way and both easily. They were able to flip the governorship here, Gretchen Whitmer winning, Debbie Stabenow also holding off John James, who of course is now trying again against Gary Peters. But also, kind of similar to Wisconsin, the polls are showing one thing and one thing consistently, and that's that, Biden's way ahead of Trump. Furthermore, the Trump campaign has pulled their ads out of the state altogether. So this, to me, is going to be likely Democrat. Pennsylvania, just like Michigan and Wisconsin, two statewide races in the 2018 midterms that both went the Democratic Party's way, and convincingly. Name is escaping me. Bob Casey, the Democratic incumbent senator, won re-election easily. Tom Wolf, the governor, easily won re-election as well. But vote by mail is obviously going to be a big factor here, okay? And I think people sort of expect that Joe Biden is going to sweep this state pretty easily because of his ties to the state. This is where he was born. But I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. And again, polls in the last 3 weeks have really shown a narrowing in this state. That's why I have this as a tilt for the Democrats. Delaware is obviously going to be a safe one. It's not quite as blue as most people think. The Republicans regularly get over 40% here. But again, even really for any Democrat, this is going to be a safe retention for them. And of course, this is the state that Joe Biden represented for decades in the Senate. New Jersey will be a safe Democratic hold. Connecticut will be a safe Democratic hold, as will Rhode Island. Massachusetts, we finally know who the Senate candidate is for the Democrats, and it will be Ed Markey. He will win in November. New York will obviously also be a safe 29 votes, as will Vermont, a safe 3 votes. Now, New Hampshire obviously was the closest race in 2016. Hillary Clinton barely edged that one out. Maggie Hassan in 2016 was able to win that Senate race by 0.1%. Cannot get any closer than that. She is up in 2 years, and if the Republicans throw Chris Sununu, who's a very popular Republican governor, at Maggie Hassan, I predict Chris Sununu will win that race. Furthermore, at least helping the Democratic Party's cause, though, is that Jeanne Shaheen, the other Democratic senator, is up for re-election this time. The Republicans were not able to field any kind of real serious candidate, and that is why Jeanne Shaheen will pretty convincingly win, as will Joe Biden. And then in the state of Maine, I'm still going to give one vote to Donald Trump, because I still think up here in the north portion of the state, he will get just enough turnout to edge out that one vote. So mostly the same map as our last prediction, although keep an eye on Nevada, because if those polls remain within 5 points, Donald Trump has a chance there, because the turnout in this state is going to be lower than usual. And it's already closer than people expect. It's just, the Democrats have won basically every election here in the last, 6 years, but the margins are tight, and if turnout is not high, the Democrats are in a lot of trouble there. Also, keep an eye on Georgia and Texas, because we don't know necessarily what's going to happen in either of them. But there's your final map, 314 to 224. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please comment down the suggestions below and hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Again, if you have any questions, things you disagree with, things you need to correct me on, please, put that down in the comment section below. I just go on. I don't have anything in front of me. I just talk, and staring at the screen through all 50 states, so I may have missed something. But again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.